All right, let's talk about the definition of the term service. It's really important that we understand defined terms because that's what will get us into various areas of the National Electrical Code. If I know I'm dealing with a service, then I know that I have to go to Article 230. So now, this simple term has had a journey and a half. There's been a struggle going on recently with relationship to the growth of our interconnected systems to understand what is service equipment, what is a service conductor, what is a service disconnecting means, so that we properly apply equipment in the field in a safe manner. The National Electrical Code, where it stands today, makes it very clear that service and utility are hand in hand. When I say service equipment, when I say service conductors, I know a utility is involved as a source. Whether that source is normal power distribution, flow of current, power, or if it's fault current. You got to think about power flow under both conditions. I know that there is a utility involved. If I look back over history, the clarity of the relationship with service to utility through the eyes of an individual today aren't as clear because they did not use the words utility back in the day. As I walk through some of this history, I think you'll understand the reasons why. I want to start our journey in 1923 because that's the oldest code book that I have as a resource. If I look at the language that is in the 2023 edition of the code as a definition for service, it says that portion of the supply conductors which extends from the street main to the service switch of the building supplied. There is no discussion here of flow of current. It's simply the portion of the circuit. We don't talk about power flowing from and to. Because back in 1923, we didn't have alternative energy. We didn't have photovoltaics on the roofs of residential dwelling units and commercial buildings. We didn't have a lot of what we're seeing today. So you got to think about this definition through the eyes of an electrician or an engineer back in 1923. When we said power was coming from the street, we knew it was coming from a utility. So the connection with the utility is somewhat implied, not explicit. Now, if I moved to 1940, the language changed a little bit. They added more words because I think, in my opinion, again, I don't have the ROPs, report on proposals, and report on comments like we have later in the process. But in my opinion, when they say, in the past, they said the portion of the supply conductors which extends from the street main to the service switch, they wanted to get a little bit more granular. So they said a service is the conductors and equipment for delivering energy, electric energy. Now we have the delivery. We have the from and to now. For delivering electric energy from the secondary distribution or street main, or from a distribution feeder, or from the transformer to the wiring system of the premises served. So you have this laundry list, I'll call it, for lack of a better word. We know the very first portion of this sentence that it is service and the conductors, so it's the equipment that's for delivering power, electric energy, from, now they have secondary distribution, or street main, or transformer, or distribution feeder. These are all different ways, and then probably what happened was they said, look, we have these different scenarios now. We're growing. Electric energy is growing in its distribution. We have various ways, a lot more than what was in the code before, of delivering power from a utility to a structure. And they include a secondary distribution network. In the large cities, they had secondary distribution networks. They didn't have a disconnect out at the street in downtown New York or downtown Chicago, etc. Right? They had secondary distribution systems. So you probably had utilities or inspectors saying, hey, look, I'm not sure how to handle this. Is this a service? So they expanded on that. But the important thing is they put a flow of current from and to. Now, in 1947 to 1990, they changed the language in 47, and we lived with this language until 1990. In the 47 edition, they simplified the definition of service. They basically reduced that language down. They replaced electricity supply system, or they're using the term electricity supply system, replacing the language secondary distribution or street main, from a distribution feeder, from the transformer. So the language now says the conductors and equipment, which has stayed the same, for delivering energy, which basically is the same thing as it was before, a little different wording, verbiage, from the electricity supply system. It's not a defined term in the code, but they simplified secondary distribution or main or street main, or from a distribution feeder, or from the transformer. They replaced all of that with from the electricity supply system to the wiring system of the premises served. So now they streamlined and they simplified it, but they introduced a term, electricity supply system, that's not defined. I could understand people arguing and saying, well, is my generator an electricity supply system? Is my photovoltaic system, are my batteries an electrically supply system? Sure. But in this context, remember the journey and the perspective in 1947, and we lived with this language for quite some time. The perspective was that this is a utility, but it's not explicit. Now, a key change happened during the 1993 code cycle. And what they introduced in 93 was a new term, service point. And this new term says service point is the point of connection between the facilities of the serving utility and the premises wiring. So it's that line of demarcation. So now we had this debate with the existing language of electricity supply system, etc., and how it was used in the code. And then they added this new term and they put it in the definition of premises wiring system. If I read the definition of a premises wiring system, it says that interior and exterior wiring, including power, lighting, control, and signal circuit wiring, together with all of their associated hardware, fittings, and wiring devices, both permanently and temporarily installed, that extends from the service point, this is the new language, from the service point of utility conductors or source of a separately derived system to the outlets. And it goes on. So they started to use this term. In fact, they used it again in section 230-10. Now you gotta love this. 230-10, they introduced a requirement for service conductors, which basically is a definition. Now, there was already a definition of service conductors. The definition of a service conductors was the supply conductors that extend from the street main or from transformers to the service equipment of the premises supplied. Very similar to the definition of service. Now, if I go to 230- now remember, 230-10 is titled service conductors, and I have a definition of service conductors. The requirement in 230-10 said, which was new in this cycle, the conductors from the service point to the service disconnecting means shall be considered service conductors. If you take a look at on the website, the definition of service conductors and my history there, and you'll see some of this dialogue there. But service conductors was about to get a change coming forward because somebody would have to look at this and say, we have a requirement, 230-10 service conductors. It sort of sounds like a definition. And we already have a definition of service conductors, which differs from the requirement. So This played an important role in the future of the definition of service because of that conflict that had been generated, and because now we have a relationship between service equipment and a utility. This is a specific relationship. Service Point appeared in about 6 locations in the 1993 edition of the National Electrical Code. So 6 locations within this book is where they started to pepper this service point in, obviously to add clarity. Now, the definition of service didn't change, but the influence, again, so the conductors and equipment, so the definition of service still said the conductors and equipment for delivering energy from the electricity supply system to the wiring system of the premises served. Now, 1999 is another very significant change. This is where we began. Wait, what year was it? It was 1993. So then we had the 96 code, and then we had the 99 code. And 99, in my opinion, was a very significant change in the history here, because now we have a clear association of service with utility. They changed the language from the electricity supply system to from the serving utility. This is where we're marrying the fact that the electric supply system is the utility. So he simplified that and created that connection. And the submitter of the public comment, which was a public comment phase during the 1999 edition, stated the following. This comment correlates this definition with panel actions on related definitions of service conductors and service equipment. Non-utility electric supply systems are normally separately derived systems and covered elsewhere. This comment incorporates the thinking in the affirmative comment on vote. The submitter was looking at changes that occurred in the first draft to service conductors and the definitions of service conductors and service equipment. So changes were made to bring in that relationship to a utility in those definitions, and probably align with those changes that were made in 1990. Now, service conductors had seen changes during the 96 edition and 99 edition. Prior to the 96 edition and the 1993 includes the definition of a service conductor as the supply conductors that extend from the street main. Remember, they still hadn't made that change. The definition of service conductors in the 1996 edition said the conductors from the service point or other source of power to the service disconnecting means. And that was influenced by the change in 230-10 during the 1990 edition of the code. Or I'm sorry, the 93 edition of the code, 1993. That requirement went in 230-10 that conflicted with the definition in 93. In 96, they moved that over and said, look, a service conductor needs to follow what's in 230-10, and then they added or other source of power to the service disconnecting means. Now, or other source of power. In the 1999 edition, I am sure there was debate around what do we mean by or other source of power. Because it says in the 96 edition, the conductors from the service point or other source of power to the service disconnecting means. So are we saying that the service points to the utility, and oh, by the way, if I have a generator on site, that's another source of power. Those are service conductors too. So then we had this discussion and debate on, well, are those feeders or are those not? And during the 99 edition, the debate again revolved around that. And then based on the 1996 edition of the code, a conductor that originates from a generator and supplies a structure, even if there is no utility in the picture, are service conductors. And you can imagine how that sent a ripple effect into the electrical industry. And the submitter noted the removal of the words "or other source of power" is necessary to avoid confusion. So you can imagine the confusion that was going on in the industry and the debates. Well, if it's coming from a generator, do I have to follow the rules now in Article 230? And you know what that means. That adds cost to the installation, that adds protection, etc. But there's an argument and debate that says, well, wait a second. No, that's a generator. This is a feeder. So this is where we got into that debate in the 1999 edition. The result of those debates and changes resulted in the definition of service, which is found in the 99 edition, that says the conductors and equipment for delivering electric energy from the serving utility to the wiring system of the premises served. So they removed that "or other source of power" out of there. And it's just from the serving utility. And that language would persist through the 2020 edition. Now, the debate was here. When you say service, now think about this. In 2020, we're getting more and more photovoltaic and other types of applications moving into our industry over the years. And there was a debate. The debate was, the defined term for service was the conductors and equipment for delivering energy from the serving utility. Well, a photovoltaic system is not a utility, and they're delivering power. So the equipment that they land in, the argument was made that that's not service equipment. They say the PV disconnect, for example. And let's say that I have the PV disconnect and I connect to the line side of the service disconnecting means. The debate was, well, that's not service conductors, and that PV disconnect is not a service disconnect because the conductors and equipment for delivering energy from the serving utility to the wiring system of the premises served. That equipment and infrastructure that's coming from a PV system is not coming from a utility. So the debate and the disagreements were around that discussion. So in 2020, there was another significant change made because the point of contention was around the flow of energy. Remember, it says the conductors and equipment for delivering electric energy from the serving utility to the wiring system. Now, energy comes in the form of normal current flow and also short circuit current flow is a delivery of energy, but some people didn't understand it that way. So the debates occurred. And the Article 705, a new term was introduced in the 2020 edition, which caused a little bit more confusion. Remember, these are all interrelated. Remember how I showed you just adding the term service point caused a ripple in the changes that occurred in other areas when it comes to the word terms service, whether it be a service conductor, service, or service equipment, etc. Well, now you have in Article 705 a new term, power source output circuit, because why? There was the debate. When I connect to the line side of the service disconnect, is that a service conductor? Is that a service disconnect? That is the PV disconnect? The arguments on one side was no, it's not. The arguments on the other is yes, it was. So Panel 4 introduced this term power source output circuit, and it was defined as such. The conductors between power production equipment and the service or distribution equipment. The conductors from the power production equipment, which is very generic, could be wind, could be a generator, it could be photovoltaics, could be an inverter, whatever it is, a power production equipment. The conductors between that and the service. So if I connect into the service, now one school of thought was, hey, those are not service conductors, those are power source output circuits. And you follow the rules, say in 705, to protect those. those who understand services and service equipment and service conductors are saying, well, you're connecting to the service conductor. So that's a service conductor. You're just extending the service conductor. But normal power flow is not from the utility to the PV system. Normal power flow is from the utility, from the PV system to the panel, service panel. So the struggle and battle was occurring in the 2020 edition. The defined term left, in my opinion, the electrical industry struggling with how to address those conductors that connect the line to the line side of the service disconnect and connect in a photovoltaic system. For example, the question that we all struggled with were, are those conductors service conductors or are they power source output conductors? The 2020 edition of the code made a change around service. And because of this debate of power flow, the term service, the defined term service, the definition changed to the conductors and equipment connecting the serving utility to the wiring system of the premises served. Now you no longer have this energy flow from and to in the definition of service. And that's intentional. And the reason was because the PV industry feels that they are supplying power to, and the utility is supplying power to. So the PV industry said, we're not service equipment, we're something else, even though we're connected to service conductors. And so the journey began. Article 705, interconnected systems, and 230 are on the way to clash. Those on panel 10 and panel 4 are digging their trenches and building their ammunition to make their arguments. Panel 4 saying they're not service conductors, panel 10 saying they are service conductors when you're connecting to the line side of the service disconnecting leads. 2023, after task group work was conducted for the 2023 code cycle, and the task group consisted of panel 10 members, panel 4 members, also panel 9 members, and panel 5 members for grounding and bonding. Panel 9 because of the transformer requirements that are over there in 705. Everybody was upset. So now we have this clash, and you have an agreement that those conductors that connect to the line side of the service disconnect are service conductors. And that PV disconnect, because it's disconnecting service conductors, is a service disconnect. The definition of service did not see any changes from the 2020 edition because the battle from panel 10's perspective occurred during the 2020 edition, and they secured the fact that it's regardless of the power flow, it's anything that is connecting a serving utility to the wiring system of the premises served. The changes that ensued to align with that definition occurred in 705, specifically 705.11 of NEC 2023, which completely recognized the fact that those are service conductors, that is a service disconnecting means, and you need to follow the rules of Article 230 for protection of those conductors and for grounding and bonding. Article 250. That's sort of the journey. And where we're at as of the 2023 and moving into the 2026 code cycle is the conductors and equipment connecting the serving utility to the wiring system of the premises served. That is the definition of a service.